Welcome to the podcast. It was about a year ago when we actually started, the same two guests. It was episode number 1. We had like 3 YouTube subscribers at the time. Now, a year later, we're at over 650, and this is episode number 50. The Audacious Faith Podcast, where people watch that have the audacity to believe that God has called them to do something actually big and worthwhile in this life, and not just ordinary. And this is going to be a great episode. I look forward to everything we're going to share today. So welcome to the Audacious Faith Podcast. Have you ever heard that life would be great if it wasn't for the people? Maybe you decided that at one point in your life you were not a people person, but when did that actually become the definition of who you are? I'm sure it wasn't in the delivery room, but somewhere along the way, due to experiences and maybe hurts and disappointments, that's what you have decided. But the reality is that the most successful people in life, even though some of us have different personalities, some are introverted, some are extroverted, we all need people. And I have somebody with me today that was with me in episode 1 and now again in episode 50 who has actually built an entire organization and career and has become extremely successful because he is very good in this particular area, and that is collecting relationships and building up people. So I'm very excited to have him back with me. You can find him. He's actually a contributor for Forbes. He actually runs one of the biggest financial companies in the United States and happens to be my firstborn son as well. So Jay Jr., really good to have you back with us today for episode number 50.
Nice.
Now, when I talked to Jay ahead of time, one thing he says is he doesn't want to know any of the questions ahead of time. So nothing that I'm going to ask him today does he know is coming. And I decided on this episode to do something I have done on none of the other episodes. I usually at least prep myself as far as the questions that I want to ask. And this time, I am sitting here with absolutely nothing. Even the phone has no notes. So we're just going to have a conversation and go along and just kind of see where it leads. But I want to ask you right off the bat, because one of the things that you've always been good at from the time that you were very young is you always had a lot of people who knew who you were. And even early on in the early stages of social media, back in the MySpace days, that of course is pretty much obsolete at this point, you had a very great knack for being able to kind of get known. You would go someplace and people would actually recognize you that you had never even met before. How do you think you got into this this talent that a lot of people don't have? And what do you think makes you different on how you just collect? I know you use this term. You collect people and relationships in your life.
Well, back in, I think my junior year in high school, I had a friend named Alex who ran a YouTube channel, and so he was a year older than me. And I remember his senior year in high school. I remember him saying that he was dropping out. And I remember that day going like, dropping out? Like you're not going to go to school anymore? And, everything that you've been taught all this time is that you got to finish school, you got to go to college. And I remember Asian kid too, and you think, Chinese, you think good student, go to college, all that stuff. So he just did like everything the complete opposite. Mm-hmm. And he said he was going to drop out to become an entrepreneur, and he was going to make YouTube videos. Right. And I remember that day because I had done a bunch of YouTube videos with him and a bunch of MySpace stuff with him. Mm-hmm. And I was like 15 at the time, and he said he was going to become an entrepreneur. And I didn't know what that word meant. And all the way back then, social media, the way that we have things today like this, didn't exist, and there weren't influencers and entrepreneurs that were branding entrepreneurism. And so I remember I went and I looked up the word, and it was someone who engages in some sort of an activity for a profit, usually works for themselves, things like that. And I remember thinking, like, this guy's going to just drop out and he's going to make an entire life off of YouTube and MySpace. Like, what the heck? And I think that day it created like this space in my mind because I always loved people. I always loved connecting with people. I always loved the idea of meeting new people. And that day, you know, it's funny because I always look back at that conversation. That conversation, I think, lit a little fire in me that there is room for success outside of what's normal. So I started kind of really this entrepreneur / social media hobby, I guess. I read a book recently called Flow, and the book, I don't remember the author's name because it's not an American name, but he talked about doing things that put you in a state of flow, which is momentum, which is where like time just passes, you know, and before you know it, you look up and it's been 3 hours, but it felt like 10 minutes. And how people find these things. For example, the number one career studied that puts someone in a state of flow and momentum and just time lapse and this love and passion for what they do, where they love it more than they love watching TV, they love it more than any hobby, is actually a surgeon. So surgeons, you know, they cut you open and they do the thing, and before they know it, it's been like 10 hours and it felt like 20 minutes, you know, because there's just the tasks of everything. I kind of started that flow and that love for social media and collecting people, and but it all went back to that first conversation, which was I realized that day that there was a possibility that I could build an entire life and have everything I want if I just knew the right people and enough of the right people. And I think it just became a hobby for me that day.
It's so interesting that you mentioned him. I have not thought about him for years, but I remember him because he was going to our small private school.
Yep.
Where you were also going. And your description of him is very accurate. He seemed like he was very intelligent, but he had no interest in school whatsoever.
Right.
And I remember you telling me what he said he was doing and thinking to myself, that will never work. You're going to end up completely broke. Little did we know back then that he actually was onto something.
You know, and today he runs one of the top wedding cinematography companies in the world.
Uh-huh.
You know, and he went on from there to make funny videos, you know, what you would call like stupid YouTube videos.
Right.
And then he went on to produce music videos for artists. And then he went on to start shooting weddings, and now he runs one of the top. You know, he's been on entertainment television. He's been on, you know, every talk show host. You name it. And he's legitimately good. You know, and now he has teams that go out and shoot all over the world, and they do destination weddings. And you know, and the funny thing is that he started doing all that before it was popular, you know, which is why it's so impressive to me, even to this day, 15, 16 years later, because now it's normal to be an entrepreneur and to chase a business and to have something on the side. But he was just so far ahead.
Right.
Where it's pretty astounding.
Now, I don't know how much faith played a role in it, probably not, but it was a very audacious move to go ahead and do that, because it was totally outside the realm of what was accepted and what was normal. And really, most of the great ideas at one point, people think they're crazy. Like even YouTube itself, which most people are watching this broadcast on right now. I remember when it first came out, and it was like, the best you could do was like an 8 or 10 minute video. That was like the longest you could put out at that particular point. And I thought, this isn't going to work. And people were making videos, and I thought, this is dumb, you know. But so many of these things that now become like every day. I mean, YouTube now is watched. There's advertising on YouTube because nobody watches regular TV anymore.
Right.
So it's kind of completely shifted. Now, you had a talent in a way for this, though, even before you did social media. I remember taking you to school in the 6th grade, I believe, and it was in a town. It was a good school that we had you in, but a regular public school. And I was kind of blown away by the fact that I would drive you into school, especially when I was taking you out. I kid you not, I'm not exaggerating this. You remember this, I'm sure. It's like I was driving a celebrity in my car. All the people, friends, and especially the girls and the different ones, they'd all be, waving at you when you were going. And I was totally perplexed. Nothing personal, but I had never had that happen to me in my life. So I was trying to figure out what in the world was going on. You actually didn't even seem that interested in the attention. It's not like you were seeking it. But that just was happening from the beginning. So why do you think, was there any factors you can trace back to now why you seem to stand out versus, say, most people?
I don't know. Because I don't think of it that way. But I think it's just, I have one of my favorite words. I just think it's a cool word. Because I think the word, and the meaning of the word, the sound of the word, like it sounds like what it means, which is the word curious. And I just have a genuine curiosity about people. I love meeting people. I love watching Instagram videos and TikTok videos where someone goes out and they talk to a random stranger and then they give them $1,000. I just think meeting people and people's stories, I think it's just one of the most coolest things that exists, is really getting to know people. And I also know from studying people that there's nothing someone likes more than their own name and talking about themselves. And I think everyone wants to be made to feel good. And I think if you look at anyone who's done anything great, or anyone who's done anything of great magnitude that wasn't good, all of those people had the ability to move people and connect with people and inspire people. And I think you do that by having a genuine interest in someone else when you talk to them, asking them about their story. When you tell someone, "How are you?" and they go, "I'm good, how are you?" They're not even processing the question. It's just a routine habit answer. Mm-hmm. Proven by the fact that you go to the gym and the guy at the front desk goes, "Have a good workout," and then the person goes, "You too."
Right.
And
That's
they're
true.
not even working out, they're working,
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show how autopilot we are. Mm-hmm. So I feel like when you're curious and you carry a childlike curiosity about other people, and someone says, "How are you?" and you say, "I'm actually terrible." And they're like, "Wait, what?" And you could have a real conversation and you start to connect with people, and someone asks you something and you ask them about themselves, and then you keep asking them, "Well, how'd you end up doing that?" Or "What do you like about that?" Or really and you start to peel back the layers of people. I just don't think there's anything more fun in the world than learning and understanding what makes people tick and why they do the things they do and why they believe the things they believe and where those beliefs came from. And I think that's the kind of stuff that builds real relationships. And that's what people love. There's a book, and I can't remember the book. It might have been Everyone Communicates, Few Connect, or How to Win Friends and Influence People, or The Like Switch, one of the three. And it talks about Charles Manson, right? Who's what? A serial killer?
Yeah, he's a psychopath, yeah.
And yeah, I think it was The Like Switch. And there's a detective. This is a crazy story. It still gives me chills even thinking about it. But there was a detective who went in, and he was a journalist also, something to the extent of that. And he was going to do a documentary on Charles Manson. So he went and he visited Charles Manson in prison, in solitary confinement. And he said, and he talks about how he was nervous about it. because you're going to sit with, like, across the table from one of the most notorious, murderers in history.
Right.
And he said that when he left, he couldn't help but feel like Charles Manson was his best friend. And they asked him, like, why? And he's like, I cannot shake this feeling.
Uh-huh.
Like, I really, genuinely liked the guy.
Uh-huh.
He said, as disgusting as that sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it was the way that Charles Manson was so seemingly genuinely interested in him as a person.
Mm-hmm.
He said I've never had a conversation with someone where I felt like they were that interested in me. He goes to the point where Charles Manson lifted up his water glass and went to take a drink. And while he was taking a drink, he kept such good eye contact with me that he actually looked at me through the bottom of the glass.
Oh, wow.
And he said, and I just, like, I've never felt like that having a conversation with anybody. And so, I mean, that's kind of what I mean by the fact that people, it's not hard to stand out when most people are a robot and they don't pay attention to their surroundings or anything but themselves.
True. Now, you're mentioning that and how people like to know, hear their name. And I know one thing that you were very good at, always have been good at, is people that maybe you haven't seen for a long time and yet you see them in the future. You not only remember them, but you remember details about them. You can even recognize them. I know that's something I was really horrible at doing because I'd see people as kids and now they're older and I barely even recognize or remember who they are sometimes. You've always been extremely good at that. And you mentioned also about a person with a name, and usually when a person says, hi, my name, what's your name? And most people are not actually listening.
Right.
Right? So that's why when a person says they're terrible with names, it's usually because we actually don't take the time to we're thinking about the next thing we're going to say rather than what they're really saying, right? So how did you have to work on that? Or, I mean, you've always been good at it to a degree, but how did you develop these skills better?
Yeah, I think it became conscious. I mean, I think God gives gifts. Everyone has different gifts. There's a lot of gifts I don't have, but I think the ones that I do have, I have identified them, and then I've worked on really capitalizing on them. But one thing that I do is if I meet someone, I always get their social media or their contact info. Because I just genuinely don't believe I meet people by accident without a purpose. So if I've made friends to this day are very good friends who I met on trips in Brazil, and we connected, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're from the United States also? Me too. Mm-hmm. Oh, where? Oh, geez Louise, you're in Orange County? Like, oh, let me get your Instagram. And 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years later, we're still very good friends. Mm-hmm. So when you collect people's info like that, like in today's world with Instagram or whatever it may be, it's very easy to know details about them because everything's online.
Right.
But then another thing is I also take notes. I legitimately take notes. If I go to a restaurant and I meet the owner, I go on my phone and I go to the notes and I put, Taste of Asia, Laverne, owner's name is blah blah blah, and I literally write down notes. Mm-hmm. If I have a server who I really like, his server's name so and so, and I'll do things. I have this principle that I live by, which is that everywhere I go, where I am a patron or a customer, I'm going to be the best customer that business has. Meaning that I send thank you cards literally to the restaurants that I go to regularly. Like a handwritten thank you card, like, hey, I just want to thank you guys for always providing the best customer service, Mm-hmm. I literally write thank you cards. I try to write 3 thank you cards a week. So I constantly buy on Amazon thank you cards. And then I just sit there and I go, who the heck could I write a thank you card to? And I'll pick a random person a random client who I haven't talked to in 6 months or a year and a half, or I'll send, like a Taste of Asia, for example, is one of my favorite restaurants. V is the owner. I'll send her a handwritten thank you card just to the store, like, hey, thanks for everything. I will try my best to, when I do thank someone or someone does something for me, I thank them in a way different than other people. I'll contact their assistant. I'll figure out what their favorite thing is, or what's something that they like, or I'll try to find out, hey, where does so-and-so like to eat? And then I'll do something where when they get it, they're like, dude, how the heck? Like, how did he know that's where I like to go eat? Little things like that. So I think the curiosity side is a strength of mine, in the sense that, it's the more you can have deep connections with people in the world, the easier it is for you to, number one, contribute, but then also to get everything you want out of life. Because if you know someone who could do everything, you don't really run into problems you can't fix, and you don't really run into wants that you can't bring to fulfillment, because you have contacts, and contacts that you can always tell the quality of someone's relationship with people when, I remember one time I was sitting with Dan, my mentor, and he's like, oh, you know what? Let me call so-and-so real quick. And he called so-and-so, and they answered. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really think anything of it the first time. And then there was another time he's like, you know what? I know someone who does da-da-da. He's like, hold on, let me see if I could connect you. And he called him, and they answered. Mm-hmm. And I started to realize every time this dude calls somebody, they answer. Mm-hmm. And that speaks volumes about someone's relationships, because if there are some calls that when I get a call, I answer. And there are other people I'm like, no big deal. Maybe they butt dialed me. Oh, maybe they'll text me. Mm-hmm. And so I think the depth of relationships is something that a lot of people take for granted, and life is a lot harder because of it.
Right. Now, you mentioned about showing appreciation, and that is so outside the norm. I think that's where most people fail. And I actually watched you do that a few times, and I think one of the times that stood out to me was I realized seeing you do that, going, that's a really good practice. I believe I was at a Chili's restaurant, and the service was really good. The particular waitress was really good. And so afterwards, your mom and we asked if we could talk to the manager for a second. And so the manager comes over, and we said, hey, we just want to tell you, it's the first time we had so-and-so as a server, but I just wanted you to know their service was fantastic. They were so, kind and everything. He looked so relieved because he looked first surprised and relieved, because 99.5% of the time when somebody asks for the manager, it's a complaint. Yeah. Right?
Always.
So he was like, oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that. But he looked so surprised, like absolutely blown away. Now, let me tie this in. I know that when you do this, you touched on this, because when people do some of the things that you're saying, this is why some people resist it. They go, it's always for a motive. Why are they being nice? Why are they,
right.
What do they want? What do they want from me? So there's some type of motive. You don't really do that. You're very good at just, and you mentioned how, some people would say, you're just trying to be nice because maybe you're trying to tie in with your business or something like that. But you do genuinely collect people. And it's true that if I need something or someone else needs something in some area totally unrelated to what you do normally, you seem to know someone that does a good majority of things.
Right.
Where does how it comes back to you? Because this is where a lot of people fail in the area of dealing with people. There is, in leadership, a law of reciprocity. And you said right. You like to be the best customer. You like to be, just go out of your way and show appreciation in a different way. Do you find that really, I know that's not your motive, but does that really seem to play out?
Well, it plays out in a million ways, because number one, we all have a brand. Mm-hmm. I was at a restaurant one time, and a restaurant that I frequent a lot. And I say this pridefully, that most places that I frequent a lot, then everyone who works with me frequents a lot as well. Because for one, I don't go places that suck. And then when I go somewhere and I really enjoy it, I tell everybody about it. So then you have all of Tenacity goes there. So I was at this restaurant that I frequent a lot, and we've just always been, it's not that we intentionally say, all right, we got to become the best customer. Like it's just the fact that that's just our brand.
Right.
Like I'm very proud of the fact that if I go somewhere and I have a good experience, as someone who owns a business, I appreciate people that appreciate your business. And so we're very big on that, and we tip very, very well. And a lot of times I'll go somewhere and I'll have great service, and if I know it's somewhere I'm going to come again, and the bill's $20, I'll leave $100 tip. It's because it's not a big deal. It's a big deal to the person who's making all their money on tips.
Sure.
But we've been blessed to where to leave an extra $100 it doesn't change anything for us. And so, but what it does though is it shows that person how much you appreciate them. And then the next time you come back, you get seated faster, you get better customer service, and and everyone wants to serve your table because they know that you appreciate service.
Right.
And so I'm sitting at this restaurant that we've been going to for years, and another person in my industry happened to be there that same day, and had a whole table of people. And this is someone who's been in the industry a lot longer than me. And so I called the server over and I said, "Hey, Abby, I said, come here real quick." And I said, "You see the couple that's sitting over there?" I said, "I want to pay for their meal." And she looks at me, she's like, "Really? Why?" And and she's a friend of ours now, the server, and all of them. And I said, "Well, because I want to pick up their meal, not the whole table, but just theirs specifically."
Right.
And so I do. That person says thanks, whatever. They leave. And as I'm going to pay my bill, the server, she comes to me and she goes, "Do you know them?" And I said, "Yeah, we work in the same industry." She said, "Wow." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "I would have never guessed that you knew them." And I said, "Really? Why?" She said, "Because you guys are so great and they are just terrible." She's like, "They're rude, they're cheap, they're obnoxious. Like, I would have never guessed that you knew them or that you guys did the same thing for a living." And so, in answer to your question, everything comes back. I don't believe there is such a thing as wasted energy. So it may not come back to me here, but it'll come back somewhere, and I really just believe that. And then also it's you as a person. Like, can you imagine if that's how the world looked at you, was like that, or
Right.
God, they're just terrible. Like that just, I don't know. I would never be okay with that, And so I believe if you treat people right, it always comes back to you. And good news travels slow, and bad news travels at the speed of light,
Right.
And so it's just nice. It's more fun and more fulfilling just to be a good person, and treat people well. And I think treating people well, by the way, from a society standpoint, is 99% of how people determine whether you're a good person or not. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. What you contribute, giving to charity, none of that crap matters. To the outside looking in to the world, the only thing that people decide whether you're a good person is on how you treat people around you. You could do a ton of good for the world, but if you're a jerk, nobody likes you. Doesn't matter how much you contribute.
Well, looking through the lens of faith and going on what you're saying right there, one rule that's in the Bible that pretty much any successful person that stays that way, would you say follows, is what people refer to as the golden rule, which is exactly what you're saying. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Treat others the way you'd want to be treated. Also going along with that, which you mentioned about things coming back to you. So would you say that where it says that God is not mocked, and what you sow you reap, have you seen that a lot? Not only for yourself, but I know you're not going to single out any names, but on both sides of this, when it comes to the industry, have you noticed the part about what you sow you reap? So there's those who do really good things, treat others well, and it seems to go very well for them over a course of time. And there's others that may appear successful, but they don't treat people so well, and in a lot of cases it comes back to bite them.
Yeah, well, nowadays we call it karma, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing with karma is karma only sucks if you suck. So I think what you sow, you reap, for good and for bad, both sides. And I've seen it even in my own life, where, I'll give you an example. Someone smashes in my car window, right?
Right.
And then I'm just like, I literally laugh. Like, I was not even mad. I'm just like, well, I remember when I was in high school and I went egging and I egged somebody's window. And I'm just like, hey, I wonder how many more times it's going to happen, Like, the reality is that...
We won't ask you how many times you did it, so I don't know.
Exactly. And so it's good and bad, the good and bad. And I think everything... I've read a lot of books, and I've spent a lot of money on myself, and I've worked a ton on myself, and there are some books I've read 5, 6, 7 times. And I think as you just become more aware and of just like how small you are in the grand scheme of life, you start to understand that there's cause and then effect in everything. What I touch here ripples there. What I do today shows up tomorrow, and so I think you just start to see life a little bit different, where that it's not just things happen, it's that I pulled a lever and that happened. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but and it's just down the line. Yeah, it's just how life is, and you get a lot more peace of mind too, and you get a lot more clarity when you just start to realize that.
Right. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit, because we're discussing about building up people, something you do very well in your industry of what you do. But I want to touch on this idea, not only for how you said you've personally developed yourself, but also you're very good at personally developing others and training them to also personally develop others. How about this idea of what it is a person should work on? Because the old school of thought was, if you're weak in an area, you work on that area so that you get better on that, right? But that school of thought is shifting. You touched on this earlier, on maximizing your strengths instead of spending all the effort on things that you're not good at. So maybe kind of go into that a little.
I don't know if there's a right answer or a wrong answer. It's probably a little bit of both. But in my industry, at least, in what I do, I work in a team sport, right? So the idea of, I don't have to do everything by myself. And so because I don't have to do everything by myself, that's a strength. Where usually if you can't do things by yourself, I guess normal, like in corporate America, if you can't do things by yourself, then that's going to cost you your job, because there's someone else who can do that which you cannot do. So I work in an industry that's structured in a manner where I could fill my weaknesses with talent that are good at those things, So a perfect example is Jay Justin, who produces this podcast and produces my podcast. Like, I mean, I'm sure eventually, if I took enough time, I could figure out how to do the things that he's so just naturally good at. But the reality is that it's not necessary, because no one does it better than he does, you know. And in business, if I'm weak in an area, I can fill talent that's good at that area. And what that does is that allows me to focus on maximizing the things that I'm just naturally God-given talented in. And I just think life's better that way. I think life's better as a team. Life's better doing things as a group. You know, the same way the body does not all function to do the same thing. I think companies and organizations and teams and things just do better when not everyone functions for the same purpose or the same skill set, but we all work together to achieve one thing. So I'm a big believer on maximizing your strengths, but also making sure that your weaknesses aren't the reason you don't make it.
Okay. Now, going along with that, because there's such a thing that trips a lot of people up called ego, and everybody has one. And was there a point, I don't know, I don't know that this was ever your issue, but I'm sure you've seen it in others, where you see people that they see others that are really good at something, and they kind of get envious or jealous about it instead of celebrating it. You know, where isn't it kind of more cool and more exciting to just kind of see how God's made somebody and given them certain abilities and talents and just really learn to appreciate the fact that they have those and like plug them in? And isn't it to more of a person's benefit in the overall scheme of things to kind of maximize everyone's talents and kind of celebrate it instead of pushing people down?
I think it's easy for people to do that when you could plug them in for your own benefit. So if I see someone who's really good at something and I could recruit them for my own benefit, then it's easy to celebrate for them. I think the magic comes when you could celebrate someone who's really good at something, even when it's not for your benefit.
Okay.
And I'll tell you where that comes. I think it just comes from an inward silence, like in your own mind. When you have a joyful gratitude and peace with just who you are. I think ego comes from insecurity. And so if I'm happy with me, then no one else is a threat. I think other people's success only bothers me if I'm not happy with myself. You know, and it's really a reflection of ourselves. And it's also, we also make ourselves miserable because it doesn't make anybody else miserable to be unhappy for other people. It really only just robs us of our own joy. So I think the genuine happiness for other people comes from being happy with, feeling good, and you only feel good when you're happy with you. So
exactly. So going along with that, you've been very successful in the industry that you're in, and there's others that I would say have similar skill sets as far as the mechanical part of that industry, right? But there's very few that seem to hit it in the personal level. I mean, there are others out there that do that, but the majority don't. Okay, so where's the difference, and how do you bring this out in people? What do you look for? Because there's people that can do a certain task, some of the same things you do professionally, and yet they don't gain a bigger following of people. They don't gain a more loyal following. They're not able to lead others. seemingly personally in their development, they don't really grow much. They don't become that very likable person. So what's the X factor? Because, I mean, you touched on it some already as far as being truly interested.
I think there's this little tiny edge that that any company that has a huge loyal following has, and it's that company makes a contribution, like they contribute, right? So, for example, like Apple is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Apple has a cult-like following, and I say it in a good way, like cult-like meaning that they'll fight you over whether or not Apple's the best.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I think the reason it is because I think people feel a loyalty to Apple, almost as if they owe Apple their loyalty, right? Like I just bought, or I didn't buy. Ronnie bought these new Apple over-the-ear, what do they call them? AirPod Max, which are headphones that have noise cancellation. And I spent like $800 on this pair of Shure over-the-ear headphones that have noise cancellation. And today I'm using the Apple ones, and I'm just like, gosh, man, leave it to Apple to make the best, bar none, freaking over-the-ear headphones. Like everything they put out is perfect, like seemingly perfect. So they have this fan base and this cult-like following that I feel like almost has this like if I don't buy Apple, like I'm cheating on Apple,
Okay.
This like I owe Apple my loyalty. Well, in the people industry, the teams that I know and the team leaders and coaches that I know have that same type of loyalty from their teammates and the people that work with them, where, like I got a buddy in the industry who runs a powerhouse company, and people on his team have told me, we feel like we owe him something. Like we always feel like we owe him something, but in a good way. Like where like we pledge loyalty and we're gonna help him stay at the top.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that magic comes from. But that comes from the leader, that comes from the coach, that comes from the person at the top of whatever it is, going out of their way to show their loyalty to whether it's their teammate, their consumer, their customer. It's you doing things you don't have to do. It's you thinking, when you've got 200, 300, 2,000, 3,000 agents, employees, teammates, customers, whatever, it's you remembering that person and texting them, at the end of the day, where they receive the text and they're just like, dude, how in the hell does this guy think of me after everything going on right now? Like, and I think that's where that's the personal side of it, is that you've contributed enough where people feel like they owe you something.
And they want to do it.
Right, because it's a man, this dude or this lady's like giving me everything she's freaking got, and I don't even deserve it. So I have to like make her proud. I think that's where that, and it's not done in a, I think everything in the world is manipulative. Everything. Even the Bible is written in some ways manipulative, where it's a guilt trip, and the way it cross references each other. But manipulation is moving pieces to make an end result, you know. But it's not always a bad thing. It's used in a bad way in most cases. People think of it as a negative thing, but it's not. It's so it goes back to cause and effect. It's, you know, if I give, the Bible says the more you give, the more you get. Not in a tangible sense necessarily, but in a commitment and in a reciprocity and the more you love on someone, seemingly the more they're going to love on you, you know, and I think that's where that magic comes from in any culture.
Okay. Now let's tie into what you're just saying there, because here's an area that you just like touched on. The more you give, the more you get, say from a biblical standpoint, where people will look at giving, for example, and they'll say, well, you know, they're talking about the scripture where God says that if you give, he'll give to you sevenfold and everything. That shouldn't be the reason that you give. So their excuse then for it not to become the reason to give is they just don't give.
Right.
Right? Where at the same time, if you think about it, I mean, let me get your view on this. The Bible also says you ask and you don't get because you're asking so that you can spend it on your own pleasures. But if your motives were right to do the right things with it, and the Bible says that if you give faithfully in faith, then God will supply over and over again, what would be wrong with that?
Well, I'll tell you this. I didn't write it, but coming from a place of abundance, the Bible says the more you give, the more you get. And someone says, well, that's not supposed to be the reason for why you give. My question would be, then why did they put it in there?
True.
You know? Then why is it in there? Why does it say that then? You know,
right. So when a person says that's not the reason, is that based on what God is saying? Or is God saying in faith, just understand that when you freely give to me, I've got you taken care of? So a lot of people put on what human beings have said instead, right?
Like I said, I think the Bible is very manipulative in the sense that, but in a good way, in the sense that it says that. Then it also says, you know, there are other verses that people will take out of context to say that being rich is bad. You know, so, well, if being rich is bad, then why, if I give more, I get more, you know? And so there's so many places where it cross-references itself, not contradicts, but cross-references itself to hit every side of everything. But I believe that it all goes back to intentions, you know, and I'm a big believer that the more I give, the more I get. And if my intentions are pure, then I believe God will keep on pouring it on in abundance because my intentions are pure. And I know my intentions are pure. So when I pray to God, Lord, give me more, because then I could give more. Mm-hmm. You know, I have seen that come to fruition over and over again.
Right.
You know, and it's and of course, I should remind that we started with nothing.
Right.
And I've seen it come to fruition over and over and over again. And so I have a confidence in giving, because I know that even when we were giving, when we didn't really have seemingly tangibly extra, that principle still stayed true. You know, and it's never not been. So I think it's maybe a hard concept to understand if you haven't experienced it. And you also can't practice that principle one time and then, right, you know, the next time you struggle, you're like, damn, I knew I shouldn't have freaking done that. Mm-hmm. You know, like it's a timeless principle that doesn't have a return date, you know, but I've seen it become true over and over again. Not just monetarily, but also in relationships and opportunities, and you know, a lot of ways that amount much greater than, you know, monetarily.
Sure. So tying that into, say, the parable of the talents, which is in Scripture, where each one's given a certain amount, and then the owner actually takes a look and sees what it is they do with the opportunity or the amount that they have. And then where it's distributed after is based on what they did with it. Right? In fact, too many people fall in that lower stage where, I know you to be hard, and I know life is hard, and I know it's going to be difficult, so I just hit it and saved it, and I didn't do anything. And that person actually gets it taken away, and the ones who was actually doing stuff with it is given more based on the fact of what it is they're going to do with it, because they've already proven that, right? So let's kind of shift on that. I know that you're going to be going back to doing something that you've done before, but you haven't done it in a while. We were talking about YouTube earlier and all of that. And by the way, I'm going to make a plug right now. There's 2 channels that you should be subscribing to on YouTube, because most of you are watching this on YouTube. Please subscribe to this one. And there's another one that you should subscribe to as well if you haven't already, and that is, what do we call it, Win Anyway?
Yeah, Win Anyway.
Win Anyway, right? You're going to be doing some videos now. You haven't done some in a while. But maybe, what's kind of moved you to do that?
Well, I'll be honest. I've been kind of retired for a couple months, or probably the most of this year, in the sense that we're just not in a position where we have to work anymore. And so I was reading, but we worked nonstop, 100+ hours a week for probably 10 years straight. And I was reading this book called Steal Like an Artist. And in the book, he was talking about, which I never experienced, but he was talking about like a creative block, and how as an artist, like you find you run into these blocks where you're just like almost like tapped out, kind of burnt out. And I never experienced that. I love to work, but he talked about like taking a hiatus, and what, I don't remember which word he used, but he talked about taking a break.
Like a sabbatical or something?
A sabbatical, there you go.
There you go.
And then and he was saying how, sometimes like that's just like the best thing for you and you never realized you needed it. And I say this with caution, because then someone who's barely worked for like a year is going to be, that's what I need, and, then just like mess up all their momentum. But for me, it was kind of on accident. It wasn't really on purpose. We had birthday parties, weddings. We were out of town for stuff. And so I probably went from running 50 or 60 appointments a week, or probably 50, 60 appointments every 2 weeks, to like I was running like 5 appointments for the month.
Okay.
And then when I went back to running appointments, I was like, oh my gosh, like I really enjoy this, and I haven't done this in a while. It took a second. So I say that to say that I decided to do the podcast again, because I think that's where I'm having the most fun, is in creating content and teaching. There's so many people want to win and they want to learn, and I think it's fun. I think contribution is fun. So the producer, Mr. J. Justin, he had this genius idea that instead of just picking it up and going from episode 41, we're just going to call it season 2, episode 1, which I think we're going to record tomorrow.
Nice.
And I'm excited about it, because it'll be stuff that just is just like pure education, covering things like money and finance, business and entrepreneurship, and then just like self happiness. I think happiness it's not an actual destination. It's just a culmination of other things, like joy and peace and gratitude and fulfillment and purpose and stuff like that. And so, just talking about stuff like that, but really unedited. I mean, we never edited anything to begin with, but just very informal, but hopefully stuff that adds value and people enjoy. So
So you're shifting a little bit. You're still doing what you're doing, but you've actually would be classified as an influencer already, and that is a big word that everybody seems to want to be today, is an influencer, right? You hear a lot of that. But I think you've gone through the steps here and laid it out a little bit today. Can a person be an influencer without first being influenced? And is there come a point, I mean, you're kind of in that mode at this point, and yet you're still at the same time needing to be influenced as well, right? So how do you strike that balance? And what would you say to someone that just says, I want to be an influencer, but they haven't really done much at this point, but that dream is in their heart?
Well, I don't think anyone really often comes up with something that has never been already done. Obviously, from an invention standpoint, that's a whole nother argument. That's very different. I mean, from like artists and entertainers and musicians and everyone, they steal inspiration from and content and ideas from people who they respect and admire and look up to, and then they build on it and they make it their own. And so the best influencers, the best teachers, are also the best students, because otherwise you don't have anything to teach.
True.
And so someone wanting to be an influencer, be a person of influence, the reason that we're good at business is because we're the best students. Mm-hmm. You know, we're the most coachable, we take the most notes, we study the hardest, and I think that it's easy to talk about things that you're doing versus talking about things that you used to do or you plan to do. You know, but if you're actually studying, then it's very easy to teach, because you're just teaching on the backs of things you've already learned, you know, or things that you're currently reading or things that you're currently working on. So I think if someone wanted to shift to be an influencer, obviously you got to have like some influence, meaning that you've done something, and then also I think the best students are the best teachers.
Okay. Now, going along with that, very familiar saying to people that have studied leadership, but your take on this one, you're either growing or you're dying.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I understand it in the business context that it's set in. But I think there does get to a point, if we're talking business, where the business is growing on its own. You know, for example, cancer is a perfect example of something that could be growing on its own, and at the same time you're still dying. And so I think things, if we're talking business, eventually it'll get to a point where it's growing, whether you're growing or not. But from a personal standpoint, I think the second you stop growing, you kind of lose it. You do. I notice even if I don't run an appointment for a week with a client, then I sit on an appointment, I'm like, ooh, not as sharp as I was a week ago, you know. And so I do think it's very true.
So tie this now and shift it over to a spiritual standpoint, all right? And if a person is no longer growing and there's nothing else that they see that they're supposed to do or venture into, or a new idea or a new person to help or a new cause or, you know, something that's still left, isn't essentially life pretty much just existence and kind of over?
Well, it comes down to purpose. So I think that's one of the most confusing things about Christianity, is my purpose to, this would be an interesting way to end the podcast, is my purpose and my job to go home and study and have my nose inside the Bible all day and come to church and study and attend Sunday school and study and go home and study and then die? Or is my purpose to go out and just share the gospel message? Because you could be the best Bible scholar, but if you never passed it on, then what was the point? Because when we die, we all go to heaven. So
I would tend to lean towards what you're getting at right there, but not everyone would agree. So as we do end the podcast, because you suggested that, this is what we would like to do. Not only subscribe to the channel, but YouTube allows you to place comments on the video. We'd be interested on your take about not only what you thought about this whole video, but that last question. What is your real purpose? And what do you think about you're either growing or you're dying? We'd be interested to see the comments, and we will respond to them. So thank you so much for joining us today for big episode 50. It's kind of amazing. It seems like just yesterday when we did episode number 1. And there is much more to come and many more great guests and much more to do in the future. So be sure you check out everything on the channel, as you probably missed some of the videos. Make sure you catch them all, because everyone has a story, as Jay mentioned earlier, and it's fascinating to hear what God's been doing through people's lives. So thank you once again. May God bless you. This has been the Audacious Faith Podcast. Number 50. We were going to start off on that year talking about audacious faith, which is those that... I got to start over. Dang it.
What happened?
We definitely have to include clips.
What?